Hi, everybody. Welcome. This is the panel on transaction censorship. My name is Craig Deutsch. I am the editorial project lead at Bitcoin Magazine Pro, and I am joined by Nick Hansen, the CEO of Luxor Technologies. I think furthest down, yeah. Also joining us is Udi Wertheimer, co-founder of Taproot Wizards. And Paul Sztorc, the founder and CEO of LayerTwo Labs. Thanks all for joining me. So this panel is about transaction censorship, but maybe it should be about wardrobe censorship. I do a little joking, okay. So let's go ahead and just start about how blocks are constructed. Right now, Stratum V2 is the main mining protocol for communication between miners and pools. Nick, as our resident mining expert, can you just talk about how blocks are constructed and some current limitations for individual miners who rely on the pools to build those blocks?
So blocks are constructed by analyzing the mempool. So every node out in the world has a view of all the transactions that are pending. Basically, the way it works is all the transactions that have the highest fee are filtered up to the top, and then we take that portion and create something called a block template. That block template will be the proposal that we'll submit to the network once the proof of work has been demonstrated. And then once that block has been solved, it's added to the chain. The rest of the nodes, all of the nodes that I'm sure a lot of you are running, will actually get that block, validate that it's accurate, and then the mempool state will change, and then we just do that forever.
So there was some criticism when Stratum V1 was implemented because of it removed the get block template, which allowed miners to construct their own blocks. How does Stratum V2 solve this, or does it solve this? Can you talk a little bit more about how Stratum V2 changes the way that blocks are constructed?
Okay, so Stratum V1, basically all of that stuff that we do to construct the block template, we send that out to the miners over a protocol called Stratum V1. They have no input into what goes into that block. Stratum V2 implements something called job negotiation, where basically up front the miners and the pool agree what the transactions will be within that block, and if there is a transaction that isn't in the block at that time, the miner can propose it through a protocol called job negotiation. Stratum V2 implements a lot of interesting things that that I do think Stratum V2 is a meaningful and important improvement. But when people talk about Stratum V2, really the only thing that they're talking about is job negotiation, because that does introduce a way to reduce the censorability of the network and introduce transactions to the mempool that wouldn't have otherwise been there, because for whatever reason, maybe a miner the mining pool is censoring those transactions either for regulatory reasons or otherwise. The miner can propose them and add them to the template.
Thanks. So part of the idea for this panel came about in response to the Ordinals and inscriptions craze, and whether these transactions should be considered spam. From detractors, there's been ideas for filtering transactions using node policy. Right now, we already have some examples of filters. So 1 sat per vbyte as a minimum fee is a node policy. It's not a consensus rule. The dust limit is a node policy. And now there's been a recent node patch, which is ord disrespector. So similarly to the previous examples, it only prevents the relaying of those transactions. Udi, what are your thoughts on these types of filters? Would you consider this a type of censorship?
I considered it role-playing games that people like to play in their basements with their little Raspberry Pi nodes. I don't see how it relates to actual mining. I've never heard of a miner who's running, or a mining pool that's running ord disrespector, or a filtering patch like that. But of course, if they want to, they're more than welcome to. But I think they'll find very quickly that it's not very profitable and fairly expensive for miners to try to censor these. So I don't expect that they'll want to. I've never heard of a miner who's interested in doing that. I have heard of a lot of Bitcoin enthusiasts who are not necessarily miners who want to run those on their own computers, which is fine, but doesn't seem to be really relevant for mining.
And I guess the big question for miners is whether miners should be maximizing revenue at all costs. Should that be their main goal? And if not, then what exactly should they be doing, and why? Paul, can you speak to that?
Yes, I can. If this microphone is on, is it on?
Is yours not working either?
Okay. No, thanks. The answer is yes. The miners should revenue maximize, of course. Anything else has the feature that it would be contrary to what the miners want to do. So there's no reason why they would should miners just give away free money in the form of not taking the ordinal, the opportunity cost of not taking the ordinal transaction. So that's really what it all boils down to: is will miners just give away their own money for free for no reason? And that is the whole transaction censorship question. I had a question about a Stratum V2. I was going to ask Nick, but now we have two people with one microphone, but we're going to give it a try anyway, I think. The question is, Stratum V2, the job negotiation, the whole point is the mean pool. The reason why everyone loves it is the mean pool censoring, and the person, some small miner can propose, they can trump the pool by getting the block template they want in anyway, or something. They can work on their own thing. And the tiny miner, if the pool and the tiny miner disagree, the tiny client of the pool, they win. It seems to be how it must work, or perhaps not. But if that's the case, then the pool can, of course, just mine with 0.001% themselves, and they can censor anyways, and then they escape all of the blame. So that is my question to you.
Yeah, thanks for the question. I think there's actually a lot there. So actually in Stratum V2, when you do job negotiation, there will be multiple templates being delivered to each different miner. So the pool will deliver what it calls the default or de facto template, which is delivered to every miner. And then if you go through the job negotiation process, the miner that proposed that will not go to the rest of most likely will not go to the rest of the miners. It will be that miner working on it. If they happen to hit the block, then their transaction is included. The reason that I don't really think job negotiation is going to improve censorship at all, and the reason being is that the censorship comes from a regulatory, most likely will come from a regulatory overstep, meaning you're in an environment, you're in a country that wants you to sanction, let's just say OFAC transactions. There's a whole list of addresses that are sanctioned by OFAC. If you send Bitcoin to them, you're breaking U.S. sanctions, which is a very bad thing to do. And so there's a proposal, or there's been some thought around should mining pools censor those transactions if they see them in the U.S. Let's just say that they do. Most likely in the job negotiation protocol, what's going to end up happening, even if the miner proposes one of these illicit transactions, we'll call them, most likely the pool will just reject it and say, actually, we're not going to accept that transaction anyway. And so what Stratum V2 then introduces a very easy failover. So you can fail over to another pool, propose that transaction that way. But then in that way, it becomes a little more overt that a mining pool is censoring. Right now, it's not really possible to tell if a mining pool is censoring transactions because it's not overt. It could just be, oh, that pool's node is not very well connected, that hasn't propagated yet. But most likely, job negotiation, the portion of Stratum V2 called job negotiation, is not really going to improve censorship at all because of the protocol effectively giving the pool the right to say no to those transactions.
Says the trump card. Yeah, of course. Yeah, thank you. Yeah,
The
pool always has the trump card, I would think. I mean, that must be how it works. But then you have an intriguing situation where if you have a full node and you have had a transaction in your own mempool that would have met the cutoff for inclusion as far as the fees, if you've had it for more than 20 minutes, say, you must know that it has reached every pool and that they have passed on it. And in that way, Stratum V2 doesn't seem to be an improvement. See, when people are, what people love about Stratum, as you and I agree that Stratum V2 brings a lot of useful things, but the people who talk about it on Twitter, they just really think it's about the mean pool is censoring, and we get to do something about that. But it doesn't really improve that situation, I think. Maybe you agree.
So I guess since we're on this thread, yesterday Mempool.space announced an accelerator. And right now, when you go to broadcast a transaction, you look at fee estimation. You might check Mempool.space or another block explorer to see the current fee rate to get into the next block. So how does this type of accelerator, which already exists with other mining pools, how does this type of accelerator impact fee estimation as well as like potential transaction censorship, or does it?
Yeah, this is a very important just topic overall because it's kind of a canary in the coal mine as far as if people aren't getting what they want out of all the existing tech stack of Bitcoin, like the mempool, for example, they will just build some other thing that gives them what they want. And that is why the whole idea of transaction censorship is very simple, which is just that the miners will revenue maximize because that's their bread and butter, and anything that tries to stop them, that needs to have a very, this is often, I think this is muddled because it's like SegWit2x and other things where the value of Bitcoin is maybe threatened by the protocol becoming less useful. But the difference when it comes to this transaction censorship question is that the miners have the final say on what makes it into what was seen by the network by a certain amount of time. So that is the whole game of mining, and they have the final say on that. And so they can always say that they just didn't get a message and censor it if they wish. And they can also include anything. They can include a Bitcoin transaction, so this is where we're getting to maybe stamps instead of ordinals. But because of something called Alan Turing's universality of computation, you can just reinterpret any data as something else. So it's like if you have a JPEG file and you just, you're like on Windows and you change it to like a .txt file and then you open it in Notepad. People will always be able to just transform anything they want, any kind of data, image, whatever, into Bitcoin transactions and then just broadcast them on Bitcoin. So everyone who is trying to say that there is something other than a Bitcoin transaction in a Bitcoin block, and anyone who is trying to stop the miners from profit maximizing or revenue maximizing, they're just asking miners to give away money for free, and that's basically the whole story as I see it. I feel very unsportsmanlike holding the one microphone, so I'm going to give it back.
We can switch chairs, and then it will be easy for you too. Totally. On that point of should miners, censor ordinal transactions or JPEG transactions or whatever, we talked about this before. I don't even think about it in the context of should or shouldn't. I think they cannot censor them because if they do, it hurts their profitability and eventually just they won't be competitive. So mining pools cannot censor it or they're going to lose in the competition to the miners who don't. So it's not even, there isn't really a choice. Mining pools have to include those things.
Yeah, exactly. So I was on a Twitter space talking about the Big Wizard and other ordinal stuff, and the very angry Bitcoin guy got on stage and asked me, well, why aren't you running Ord Disrespector? You should turn that on. You're attacking Bitcoin. Why would you turn that on? I said, well, I'm the only CEO of a mining pool that's here talking to you about this stuff. All the other ones are stoked that this is happening because they're making a ton of money and a ton of revenue for their miners. You're asking me to effectively reduce the revenue of the customers that I have, which are the miners. My job is to steward their hash rate and produce the most value for that hash rate as I can. And by turning on Ord Disrespector, I would be effectively, doing a disservice to my miners and effectively my customers. And that's going to put me out of business because none of the other pools are going to do that either. So there is really, like Udi said, you're effectively asking the mining pool to reduce their potential revenue, and it's just not going to happen because that's the way the consensus is built, is to maximize revenue and to maximize profit from the network.
So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question on that. When Luxor mined the first Taproot wizard, the very large one that got all of the Bitcoin maximalists up in arms, part of what some of them at least were upset about was the fact that the fee was set at 0 sats v byte. So it was an out-of-band payment. So I guess one of my in going back to the the mempool.space example with the accelerator, are those payments made out of band? Is this a way that mining pools could be taking additional revenue without potentially having to disclose that publicly on the time chain, and for their miners to be receiving the fees from that?
I think it's very straightforward that this is another example of what I mentioned before of the existing system doesn't work. So if people are paying out of band, then miners control, they have a certain amount of block space that they want to sell. Someone wants to buy it. We had this public mempool, but if it's not going to facilitate that transaction, then they will just do the out-of-band payment. So,
yeah, I think if the laser eye maxis want to have efficient, transparent reporting of how transactions flow and fees and so on, the mempool will have to become more useful. Right now, there's a lot of people who want to, for whatever reason, they want to inscribe 4 megabyte transactions. There's a bunch of them. They cannot do that with the mempool. So all of that, that information will not be available in the mempool before it's mined. After it's mined, you're not going to know for sure if the fee that you see is the fee that was actually paid. If you think that those are things that are valuable, then the mempool is going to need to be improved to accommodate for this, because people are going to keep doing that because they want to. We can't stop them. The protocol allows for it. So the question is, are we going to have the mempool serve those people as well, or are we going to say that they shouldn't be part of that mempool for whatever technical reason, which is also okay, but that would mean that they would have to bypass it because they're still going to do it.
Yeah, transaction accelerators have been around for a long time, but they were mostly for like a transaction. You accidentally put 1 sat per vbyte, and you need to get it through, so you can go through and pay the pool out of band. This has been around for a long time. ViBTC has it on their front page. A lot of mining pools have done this throughout history. Now, the problem is if it becomes prolific, if that becomes the way that fees are paid to mining pools, that starts to look kind of like an attack on Bitcoin. The other pools, so I don't know if people don't know, most pools now are pay per share, meaning you pay the expected value of every share that's submitted to the pool, regardless of whether you find blocks or not. Maybe 94 to 96% of all hash rate in the world flows to PPS-based pools. That PPS calculation includes transaction fees. So if there's a mining pool that's taking a bunch of out-of-band transactions, they're effectively reducing the PPS rate for the rest of the network and the rest of the pools, which then will drive all of the hash rate to the one pool that's doing all the transaction acceleration. And so, like with what Mempool is doing, Mempool Space is doing, they're going to effectively make it way more centralized, or they're going to apply a centralizing force to the hash rate that exists today, because they're going to make all the other pools less profitable. Now, Luxor hasn't subscribed to the transaction acceleration program that Mempool Space has. I believe they announced it was Foundry. I'm not sure, but that's just going to continue to accelerate the centralization of hash rate if that is the case. If that becomes a very prolific way of doing transaction propagation and transaction fee payments.
So let's talk about the centralization of mining, because it becomes more easy for transactions to be censored if miners are centralized. And
yes, but what does it mean? What is the definition of miner centralization?
It's a good question.
It is a good question, yeah.
Right now we have 3 pools that have a significant share of hash rate, and I don't know what the percentage of that is offhand, but it's a lot.
But is that because that's just a certain grouping, There's just like, maybe they have a. It's just like just because someone runs a pool, like he just gave you a perfect example of someone who controls a pool. They own a pool, but they have very limited control over it because they will lose clients immediately to a rival pool if the pool doesn't, So what we want is it to be as cheap and easy as possible for someone to start a new pool, new competing pool. That stops the pools from misbehaving. The same reason why we want miners to revenue maximize, in contrast to an older dispute such as SegWit2x, we want the software developers to write software code that maximizes the value of Bitcoin. It's a parallel situation, but I think it's the lesson of the SegWit2x era was that miners should be very tame and just do whatever they're told or something like that. There's still this lingering cultural baggage from SegWit2x that carries through to the present day. but the miners must revenue maximize, and we wanted it to be as cheap and easy as possible for someone to start a new pool. I think sometimes people use a definition of miner centralization that goes something along the lines of, if one miner becomes more profitable for any reason and puts another miner out of business, then that is mining centralization, which I think that definition cannot possibly be useful, because that is like just happening all the time. Every 2 weeks, every time the difficulty resets, it fires the bottom half of the mining performers.
So I guess my question stems from like a concern around that being an accelerator being so successful that so much of the hash rate goes to one particular miner or a couple particular miners, because then it opens up the network for potentially more censorship.
I think we should bet everything on the censorship question, but isn't it interesting that the idea that if you revenue maximize, you're going to include as many transactions as possible, and if you can only include so many, you'll put the ones that paid the higher fee first. To me, that seems to be the definition of not censoring. So the fact that someone would block a transaction for some kind of a political reason, or that we give these other people influence over, like someone in a bureaucrat in a different country, influence over the Bitcoin protocol, that would be like one kind of censorship. But then also the OR disrespectors, doing a similar thing. If you just say the OR disrespectors are all from a different country and they're all lawmakers or something like that. So the question of, it's really all just about the revenue maximization of the miners, which is why I think it's, well, I mean, don't you think that, like, what do you think of, like, is it mining centralization when very many people join a few pools? If all the other pools are irrational, and if, in particular, if they censor? What if all the other pools censor and there's only 3 that don't, and everyone joins those 3? Is that mining centralization?
I mean, it can become mining centralization if it's an overwhelming majority. But I think like it goes back to like, are they acting in their own best interests, and does that also act in the best interests of Bitcoin? I mean, one of the fascinating things about Bitcoin is you're economically incentivized to act in the best interest of the network at large. So I do want to go back to the mempool and how that is specifically not able right now to function with like 4 megabyte blocks and things like that. And can you just explain why that's the case? Because for people who might not understand.
Right. So the way transaction propagation works by default, in addition to validity rules that just check that a transaction is valid, there's also what is called in the technical terms is standardness rules, and that's basically policy rules, and they basically affect how transactions are allowed to be propagated through mempools of the Bitcoin network node, Bitcoin node network, into eventually a mining pool. And that peer-to-peer network does not allow for propagation of transactions that are above 400 kilobytes. So again, it's not because the transaction is invalid. It is valid, but the peer-to-peer network will not propagate it unless it gets into a block. So that just means that if you do want to get a 4 megabyte transaction into the network like we did, and like a bunch of others have done after us, then you have to do it. You basically have to contact the mining pool directly to do that. And that kind of reduces the efficiency of the mempool. Yeah, it's just magic. Ignore it. it's not. It just it kind of makes the mempool a little less efficient, because it means that it doesn't serve everyone's needs. Some users of the Bitcoin network cannot use it, and it doesn't fully reflect what the actual state of transactions that are waiting into inclusion into a block. So it's inaccurate, and it is also creating eventually, I think, for mining pools, the equilibrium they would probably want to strive for is that everyone gets an equal opportunity to mine those juicy 4 megabyte transactions, and not just the pools that get those sent directly to them, right? So those kind of things clearly can hurt decentralization of mining, but it's really up to mining pools to they could all connect and decide to receive 4 megabytes transactions. They could start their own alternative mempool. There's a lot of things they could do. I think that as ordinals become more popular, as inscriptions become more popular, and I fully believe that they will. It's funny. I've heard a bunch of people saying on panels that, oh, this is a fad. I've been hearing for 3 months that it's a fad, and the fad seems to keep growing. I really think they're here to stay, and I think that mining pools are going to have to start thinking about this more seriously, because again, this isn't just. I feel like right now people in the mining space that I've talked to seem to think of it as like just a juicy booster to their revenue, which it is. But also, it kind of requires involvement, because mining pools that will not optimize for this will end up being uncompetitive compared to the ones that do.
Yeah, so the Mempool policies, there's actually an alternative implementation called LibBitcoin by Eric Boskell. They remove that entirely because they think that any transaction that is valid and meets the consensus rules should be allowed to be propagated. The reason that we don't propagate those now by default is because they're DOS vectors, DDoS vectors. Basically, if you're spamming 4 megabyte transactions to everybody, it takes a lot to propagate and validate those. Same with zero fee. It's a very easy way for you to spam the network with zero fee transactions. That's why those don't get propagated. Those would be considered DOS vectors, and that's why they remove those. Is it time for me to invoke MEV? Do we want to talk about MEV?
Sure, let's talk about it.
Okay, so MEV on Bitcoin. That's MEV. So from ETH, they basically there's this huge business called Flashbots that they actually integrated into ETH to help combat miner extractable value. Basically, the idea is like in DeFi stuff, you can or remove liquidity, let a trade occur, absorb the ARB opportunity, and then add liquidity back. There's a bunch of different attacks, or I don't know if attack is the right term, but a bunch of different techniques that you can do. Generally, it's up to the mining pools to do this because they're the ones that actually get to order the transactions. Now, with BRC20 and all these inscriptions coming, mining pools are going to be incentivized to place those transactions in a particular order. That could be considered a type of censorship. I'm not sure if it's censorship in the classic sense of like binary, but you are effectively modifying the consensus without outside of the standard rules of the fee, the fee rate. So that's a very interesting potential vector for mining pools to become vastly more dynamic than they are today, where generally a mining pool is plus or minus a few bips within all the other mining pools on efficiency and things like that. But if MEV becomes a real thing, that's a very meaningful, like hundreds of millions of dollars of revenue have been generated by MEV and ETH. And if that comes to Bitcoin, the mining pool game is going to change very significantly.
So, I think it was around when, I think it might have been before SegWit was introduced and widely adopted, there were consistently high fees, and it seemed like it was coming from a mining pool who was just putting extra fees to drive up the fee market. Would you consider that like a form of MEV?
I would say no. I wouldn't say that's MEV. MEV is generally more transaction ordering.
I think with MEV, it's kind of like you're doing something other than including the transaction. So there's some other thing going on, and the sum of all of that equals more money for the miners. I think it kind of cuts into a little bit about how easy it is to run a mining pool, whereas how difficult is it to check the transactions to make sure they're valid and then order them or something like that. And then whereas with Ethereum, they are doing many more steps. And this, I think the reason why it makes people uncomfortable sometimes is that it does cut into what I was saying about how it's we want it to be very easy to run a mining pool and to audit a mining pool to make sure that it's doing what we want it to do. Whereas with MEV, it does seem to be it seems like there's like a victim with MEV. There's traders are trading, and they would have gotten a better deal, but instead the miners get a better deal. So it's suddenly a very adversarial relationship between a miner and the end user. But I do think that miners will revenue maximize, which is the bottom line, as always.
Yeah, it creates I think it makes mining into a very different type of business, because either it might not be the miners themselves. It might not even be the mining pools themselves that have to do this because maybe they outsource it. But at some point, someone has to be very intimately familiar with the way that users are using their network, what their motivations are, what are they trying to achieve, and the miner kind of tries to extract value from that, which has not been really happening in Bitcoin in the last few years. Maybe for the first time again, sort of at some very specific points in the last 3 months. And again, yeah, it's specifically about, it usually comes down to ordering transactions, right? Because it's not really about letting a transaction in or not letting it in. You will eventually probably let it in happily, but when there's like this added semantic to the point in time that the transaction appears relative to others, then because miners are the ones that decide that, then they might find that there's that there's a way to extract value from that. And just like as an idea, as an example, right? If there's been this little race that Ordinals people have been doing to get into the first 10,000 inscriptions, for example, right? Now, because they have this number, and some people had this added, they value having a low number of an inscription. So if you're a mining pool and you see 20,000, inscriptions coming in, and you need to pick the first 10,000s, then of course, that might be very valuable for the people who are creating those transactions. It is it is very different from what usual Bitcoin transactions are, where people do not necessarily care about urgency and order.
Yeah, it's like you take a little bribe on the side to get in the first 10,000.
Yeah.
So listen, I'll pay you a little extra.
Yeah.
Want to be the...
Yeah. So the issue, I mean, I don't know if it's an issue, but this happens, MEV happens when people ascribe meaning and semantics to the order of transactions and not just the existence of them.
Yeah, certainly. I mean, if you saw this burst of 10,000 transactions, let's say we're minting a BRC20, what he's referencing here, maybe the mining pool just swaps out 5,000 of those for their own. Because they know, wow, there's a bunch of interest and value here. That's it. I would say that's MEV and potentially a censorship vector. MEV is very centralizing. That's a big problem. We talked about, we're talking about mining centralization. We can get into this, we can get into the semantics or the minutia of what centralization is. In my opinion, it's one entity producing more blocks than the other. That's kind of the way I would define it. And MEV is very centralizing. The reason being is that it's highly technical and very difficult to do. That's why Flashbots was built. Flashbots was built to basically make it easy for everybody to do MEV. But before that, there was a huge centralizing force towards pools that were doing MEV because they were massively more profitable, like to the tune of 20%. When we negotiate fees with miners, you're talking about like single bips, the difference between 1.01 and 1.05% fee. If you're talking about adding 20% more revenue, that's 2,000 bips. That is an incredible amount of revenue that could be added to pools, which will certainly perturb and cause centralization towards a pool that's able to do MEV effectively. And
I'll just add that when in this discussion about MEV, there's kind of three groups that I see that are kind of playing that game. There's end users, there's application developers, and then there's mining pools. For end users, MEV is obviously, end users would prefer that MEV doesn't exist because MEV basically means that miners extract value that could otherwise have gone to the end user. So end users would prefer MEV not to exist, but there's not anything they can do immediately other than trying to pick applications that do not have excessive MEV. So, and that brings us to application developers. They can try to design their applications and their protocols, and BRC20, for example, is very MEV heavy, but I wouldn't be surprised if BRC20 will be over time adapted or replaced by a protocol that is not as MEV heavy. So application developers can help solve it in that way. Mining pools, however, will probably have to be on top of the MEV game, from now on forever. Because even though I would expect application developers and users to push to a MEV light world, there are always going to be these, these temporary period of times like we have had in the last month, where you see fees going up very high because basically of these MEV phenomena. So mining pools will have to be ready for it. It is going to happen, even if it's not going to stay, going to happen all the time. It will happen sometimes, and this is what we've seen in Ethereum too. It's not like Flashbots is making buckets of money necessarily right now, but if you look at a year ago when new protocols popped up on Ethereum like every week, and there's been like this entire DeFi conundrum and NFT and whatever, then during those periods of heat, MFE revenue goes up a lot. So I think pools will have to kind of adapt to it.
This is all a very healthy thing, though, I think. Don't you think? Like, because, well, like, for those of you who don't know, something weird happened at once at Scaling 3 where a miner left Scaling 3 early to signal for Bitcoin Unlimited with 9% of their hash rate, and this led to a kind of blockade of BIP9 activation of SegWit. And then it started this whole like miners versus developers like axis or something. But really, the miners are just, when the miners revenue maximize, they are just trying to make it so that the customer is actually, whoever's paying out there this money, they're trying to maximize like the end user's use of the protocol. The miners want the price of Bitcoin to be as high as possible. Miners want the transaction fees to be as high as possible. So this has always been a kind of very healthy and very rational feedback loop that we've sort of like we kind of like took a break from for like 5 years, and now it's like returned. So I don't know, like that's just kind of like, yeah. What do you think is like the next? What's the next for? Where's Ordinals going to go? We're going to go like, how high are the fees? See, because the thing is, the fees are very low. That's part of the reason why Ordinals could break in, is it didn't really cost that much to actually fill up the block, which in a way implies that the people were not actually making use of the blocks.
Right. I would say the reason that Inscription got popular and were seen as so appealing to such a broad audience was because block space was underpriced for a while, artificially.
It's very cheap. And then we see the fees per block, like total US dollar fees per block, that will go up sometimes, like during these bubble periods. But on the whole, it then returns to a very, very low rate. And only with the Ordinals has it been anything above that rate. It may return back to its lower rate again, or it may not. But it's kind of interesting that the one time the fees have stayed slightly high has been because we've done a kind of like orthodox, non-laser eye type of thing.
Yep.
Do you think mempools will clear again?
It's a great question. I would say yes. I think the default answer needs to be yes, but we're very far away from that. There's like 2 days worth of transactions over 20 sats, so and they keep coming by the day. So early on, inscriptions were driving fee volume a bit. I mean, blocks were all full, but people were like, oh, wait, why is it still only 5 sats per VByte? That's only a little bit high. The reason is because art inscriptions, those type of inscriptions are what we would consider to be low time preference. They don't really care when it gets in, just as long as it does. What drove the big volume last week, like I don't know if you saw, but like Corsair printed 64 Bitcoin in a day. That's insane. They usually do like 30 something. The reason that there was so much fee volume during that time is because there was high time preference transactions coming into the mempool in the form of BRC20s. Basically, I need to mint faster than everybody else, so I'm going to set 1,000 sats per VByte. And it was really important to get those transactions in the top and basically get them included very quickly. And that is what causes fees to go up. The last time we saw a fee spike like that was during 2017, when everybody was trading shit coins around different exchanges and trying to get Bitcoin from Cryptopia to Bittrex and whatever, so that they could buy Pepe, whatever. That was really, and that was again another type of high time preference activity, and that's what you need to see. We need consistent high time preference activity on Bitcoin to continue driving fees and continue driving transaction fees up for mining pools.
Yeah, but of course, that's kind of a paradox, because in the long run, people are patient, right? So it's kind of like you need people to be panicked on a continuous basis. I think that's very good, but when I was talking about Ordinals, I kind of just mean this more abstract, like I kind of include BRC as Ordinals is like the name of the
technically BRC20 is built on top of Ordinals, so it's not in a
demand block space. They both take up block space.
Yes. But they're ostensibly not a Bitcoin transaction. So stamps would also be, it's part of the Ordinals movement, the Ordinals time. I think if the mempool does clear, I think that would spell the doom of there was always a long, this idea that over time, transaction fees would replace the block subsidy. So if the mempool will always eventually clear, then that does seem to imply that the fee rates will never rise above a very small amount. There will always be a time when it's only $1 per transaction for 2,500 transactions or whatever you can fit into a block. So,
but that's using dollars as a unit of account.
Yeah, but I think it should be like the total amount of money paid by users. You can use it in whatever you like. It's the purchasing power of that unit that makes the difference. So it's what do the users sacrifice in opportunity costs? Like how many hamburgers do they give up to broadcast a Bitcoin transaction? But that's however many hamburgers they give up is how many hamburgers the miners get to eat. So it's the same number. So that value in terms of its abstract purchasing power, that value, the users want that to be low, and they'll wait. They get annoyed when the fees are high, but the miners obviously want that value to be high. But it is the same value. When the block subsidy goes away, that is the same number.
But if we believe in hyper-Bitcoinization, which is a default assumption, then Bitcoin will theoretically be worth a lot more. So if the block subsidy goes away, but the fees are still at 22 cents per VByte, that might actually still be a lot in terms of revenue.
No, the fee revenue is in purchasing power, so it's independent of the Bitcoin exchange rate. It's 100% independent. The Bitcoin exchange rate could actually be increasing at an accelerating rate, and that would make no difference when the block subsidy is 0. In the interim, the block subsidy gets halved every 4 years, famously. But the Bitcoin price cannot actually double at a rate that would make up for that without it being the case that, this is I don't know if this is possible or not, but one day 99% of world GDP would just be like the value of Bitcoin. I'm not sure. I guess that's
I feel like you're a bit
maybe. But I think so that's an interesting question. But my guess is that we want miners to be allies of people who actually want to pay fees because they are the actual users, and we want to be as respectful as possible of the actual end user, not necessarily someone on Twitter. We want people who pay. They really are. They are the customer. Customer is always right. We want that.
From the point of view of the end user who's creating their transaction, the reason they would agree to pay, whatever, $20 per transaction is not related to how much it is in sats or how much what the Bitcoin price is. It's just a question of do they get $20 of value out of creating that transaction, and the answer is we don't know, and it's very hard to predict if someone will be able to get $20 of value out of making a transaction tomorrow, and it's definitely going to be difficult to answer that question in 10 years into the future.
Right, and that's why people now are paying a lot in fees for a BRC20 token because they believe they are getting more value than the fees are currently worth.
Exactly.
So we're running out of time. So I just want to do a quick run through of for final thoughts. Do you feel like transaction censorship is a reasonable or valid concern for Bitcoin?
No, not at all.
All right.
The miners can and will maximize their revenue because of Alan Turing's computational universality, among other reasons. So I also say no. But we should build something that checks to make sure that there's no transactions that would have been in a maximized block, revenue maximized block, that are not, that are being passed over, so that we can all be warned of that. But it's very easy to be warned of that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, not only should miners optimize their revenue, miners cannot not optimize their revenue, and that's what makes Bitcoin work. I'm not losing any sleep over this. I know that it's going to be fine. I've seen it work for 10 years, and it's going to continue to work.
Great. Thank you, guys. Appreciate it.
Awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Miami, for the last 3 years in this amazing city. The whole world shut down, but Miami welcomed us with open arms. We want to show Bitcoin to the whole world. We are taking the conference on the road to set the stage for Bitcoin in a new city. Nashville. Bitcoin 2024 is coming to Nashville in Tennessee, a city that is known as a music and freedom city. Bitcoin 2024 in Nashville from July 25th to 27th.